The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IFC Collaboration Series of webinars that we're running on a weekly basis. Today, we're going to have a special session. It's going to be pretty much just a Q&A session based on previous questions from other webinars and some of the most common things that happen to come across the exchange of IFC files when we have some sort of an issue with the exchange. So let's start it right away. So again, my name is Nando Mogollon, and I'm a digital design consultant with Central Innovation. And as I said before, we'll cover in today's webinar, which is a part of the series of webinars that you can subscribe on that link on the screen. We'll take it from there. And today's objectives will be basically to run through a few questions. We're not going to cover previously made material. Rather, we're going to use the same material, but we're going to try to cover the following questions as we go. So the first one, it's a question that comes through within the context of having projects with no specific BIM requirements. When that is the case, you still want to make sure that you're exchanging only data that is relevant. In a lot of cases, you will be surrounded by other consultants and engineers that might be using Revit as a primary tool for creating elements. When that is the case, you still have the option, if that's your choice, you still have the option to exchange Revit files instead of IFC files. Now, it won't be advisable for fully BIM data exchanges because the Revit file itself, it's handicapped when it comes to exporting all the data that can be exported in an IFC file. But still, if that's what it's going to make it work, at least for the sake of the coordination of the project, then it might be okay to go through that. So we're just going to spend a few minutes on that, just to show you what I know about that. And some of that may change for good in the new release of Archicad, where some of the things that I have in 23 that are based on an add-on are now coming out of the box in Archicad 24. The other question that we've got there was regarding data. Now, we touched base on that on our previous webinar last week, but we're going to cover that again just briefly. Not so much from the technical point of view, but from the point of view of making an argument that just dumping all the data might not be a good idea, but I'll show you why. So let's go ahead and cover the first point there. And once again, we only have those two questions for today, so it's going to give me plenty of time. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them on the question tab on your GoToWebinar app there on the screen. And in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and start with this. So let's cover the topic of the Revit files first. Let's go through this, and what you'll see there on the screen is nothing but the very same file that I've been using in the last few webinars. This is the one that we use for the sake of controlling LOD, if you remember that, for both level of detail in geometry and level of information embedded in that file. Now, for the sake of creating Revit files, the only thing that you need to have really is in Archicad 23 and 22. I think the add-on doesn't work in 21 or wasn't created back in 21, but it might be the case. Have to check on that. The only thing you need to have is an add-on that, when it's loaded, you'll find it in your add-on manager list. And it should be down here. It's this one here that is called Rfa Rvt Geometry Exchange. And essentially what it does is allows you to read and write RVT files. Now, there are some limitations to that. There are some things that the add-on can do, the software can do. For the sake of exchanging files, you will be first be worried about being able to send a file that a person that is using Revit and has limitations or has limited knowledge on IFC exchanges, which is fairly normal. They may be feeling more comfortable if they just receive an RVT file. Now, the RVT file that they're going to receive will be for the purpose of coordination, not a save as and carry on working type of file. So although all the information will come across, the elements that are dynamically parametric, meaning that you can stretch and keep the proportions or flip between different options in between the elements, might not be available across the site, but all the data in the elements will be embedded. So this add-on will allow you to do a couple of things. First, it will allow you to save your model as an RVT 3D model. It won't save any content on your views, and it won't save any content on your layout book. So those sort of documentation related items won't get saved with the file, only 3D model content with the embedded data. That means that in order to save that RVT file, you actually need to save it from a 3D view, meaning that whatever is visible will be saved, not the whole content of the file, which allows you a little bit of extra control over what you want to export and what you don't want to export. If I jump to the plan view on this particular file and I try to do save the file, you'll see that it's not available on the list. Now, that option, you'll think it's available through a save as, but it isn't. It's actually saved, or the menu, it's been located under the interoperability menu. So you'll find it here on the RVT export. But again, because I'm sitting in floor plan view, the option there is not visible or it's not active. So just to make sure that you're not convinced that by saving it from floor plan view, it's going to start saving all these annotation items, which don't get saved because they are basically 2D. But if you go to a 3D view, then the same option should be active. Once you click on that, it will give you a couple of alternatives there to tweak the file. And most of these will be related to how to export the data that is attached to those elements. It will allow you to export classifications and properties. And if you choose to do so, which is not, absolutely mandatory, it will allow you to choose only the ones that are attached to the classification system that you're using, or include everything, both classifications and properties, as Revit properties. Revit, by default, it doesn't really use a classification system. The classification system gets attached as a property, so that might be necessary if they want to see a classification system, although I will believe that the Archicad classification will be relevant only for the sake of matching a particular type under Revit categories. Now, all of that, you can sort it out based mostly on a trial and error basis. Try a couple of files, see what works for the guys across the board, and then keep using that. Note that the RVT translation doesn't really use a fully fledged translator the way IFC does. And the reason for that is because there are only a few things that you can tweak on it. So most of the things will be in here, and everything else will be controlled on the Revit side. Units and keeping hierarchy of complex elements, typically curtain walls, railings, and stairs, which are built on based on sub-elements or parts. And now that we have segmented beams and columns, then they can also be either saved as a single element or keep their hierarchy. So if I click this button, what's going to happen is on the Revit side, they'll get a curtain wall based on or built out of frames and panels rather than having a single element. Units, not a mystery there. Either choose metric or imperial, or typically by the project. So that'll do. Based on that, you'll simply save an RVT file, and that's the only option. So that's for you to save things with the file. So basically, you're saving these content as RVT. When the process happens on the other way around, so now you are receiving RVT files from those guys, what is going to happen is that the add-on will allow you, and for that I need to go to the floor plan view, will allow you not to open an RVT file. So if I click open, where's my thing? You're not going to get the RVT from this list. You get pretty much everything else but RVT. But it allows you to link in those RVT files. So that's going to be an extra option that when you choose to place a hot link and select a new module, you'll have, as you can see there, RVT together with the typical Archicad file types, PLNs, mods, PLPs, or old teamwork projects, 2DL for 2D elements, IFCs, Rhino, and Revit. So Revit will be an option there. Again, it doesn't really have a full-fledged translator, and the settings won't allow you to change much from it. There is not sure if I have an RVT file since this question came relatively short in time. I don't think I have an RVT that I'll be able to tweak from here. I may do, but just to give you the option or give you an idea of what it does from this point. If I choose an RVT file at this stage, what this is going to ask me is which 3D view do you actually want to bring in. So the add-on, it's basically figuring out one of the 3D views inside the RVT file, and it's only going to bring in what's been filtered in and out on that particular view. Meaning that when you're running an exchange based on RVT, not on IFC, one of the things you need to agree on is to make sure that the RVT files you're receiving will have a specific 3D view with a specific name that it's supposed to be used for the exchange. In that, you will expect to have only the 3D data that you're expecting to see in your file. So that's the one that will be sort of the view for model content in the exchange. So that's pretty much probably the most critical option that the add-on will ask you. Sadly, I don't think I have an RVT file that I can find relatively quickly, but that will be the main thing you need to consider. Let's click on cancel here. So from then on, you'll have an RVT that it's a link, which is fairly useful since any new versions or changes on that file can be easily be tracked simply by reloading and updating that particular hot link. When you place that, most of the objects, you see there's no translator for that. Most of the objects coming through will come actually as objects, and they'll be dropped in the embedded library. All right, another side of this particular add-on is the fact that the add-on will allow you to use any Revit families, which is the native format for Revit objects, and it will allow you to convert those objects, those family or Revit objects into Archicad GDL objects. So that will give you a fairly quick and faithful translation of the family. But again, well, need to go and find the particular Revit family, but it will give you a similar option. It will try to choose a 3D view to do the conversion, meaning two things. There needs to be a 3D view in the file, which typically there is, a generic 3D view, so that that is usually not the problem. It will be only a problem if you have more than one view, and then you need to choose which one might be the one that you need. Second, Revit families come, and you probably don't know this, but they're not fully flexible by default in the way that an Archicad object will be flexible. So Archicad objects tend to be by default these sort of rubber bands that you can stretch almost in any direction. Revit families tend to be the opposite. They tend to be rigid, and they will only have certain parameters that can be used in order to stretch it in one direction or the other. Those in Revit will be called types. So those are family types. And the add-on will, this particular add-on will be able to bring in one type per translation. So if you want to bring more than one type of the same family, the 3D views need to be saved, or the different types need to be saved in different views inside the family file, the RFA file. So just gonna cancel there. And that's when you want to bring in family for you to reuse in your file if you think that's necessary. That's basically or essentially what the Revit conversion will do. But again, it's limited when you compare that to the type of things that you can do with a translator here, which can filter things in and out, manipulate the properties, manipulate the conversion of the geometry, manipulate both material surfaces and layers if you need to. All right. Let's go quickly check the other question. Should we include all the data just in case? Again, we did cover some of that last time, but there are good reasons why not to do that. Mainly if you check, let me see if I can bring that across. All right, so so that you see, let me bring that on this side. What I have in here is 3 different IFC files that if you didn't see them, what I did there was essentially save from the same Archicad file to mainly these two to begin with, 2 different IFC files containing either more or less data within them, even though they're coming from the same source. So that was this. For those of you who didn't see it last time, I had a bare bones low level of detail and level of data file coming from the same Archicad file. And in this case, what I have, as you can see there, is I have a wall, but the wall is built of a single material, kind of, or it looks like it's been built out of a single material. There is a window, although the window is sort of a single plane, little detail. Same thing with this. This is a door, and you can see how it is a door. This one here is a curtain wall, and it's been classified as a curtain wall, as you can see, tell there. It actually has all the panels and everything, and you can see that on this one. That's why I built another one in there. The panels are there individually, so that's not a bitmap, just the panels that are embedded into it. Frames, they do exist, but they don't display, and the stair is being kind of simplified. So if you compare that to the original Archicad file that produces that, you'll see that there's a lot more detail into this. So I managed to control the level of detail through that. That's data. Now, sorry, that's geometry. What about the attached data to it? Well, that's why you want to bring these into consideration. Look at the difference between these two. I have a file, an LOD, with a high level of detail, both in geometry and in information, and the size of the file, it's more than 20 times the size of the file when you choose to export just lower levels of geometry and data, right? So based on that, you can tell that there is a difference coming from those things. Now, what if I do this? And this is why I created this third file that makes a point on whether we should just include everything just in case. The difference between this file and this file, it's about 40% in size. And the difference in the file itself is this one here. The file with a lot of detail in geometry will have a lot of detail in geometry, but also will have a little bit of extra detail in data. So for instance, curtain walls, end walls, they have property sets for the file rating, for both external, internal walls, base quantities, and so on. So that's just slightly more data, and it's still creating additional file size on the file. While the one that I've chosen to have higher level of geometry, so geometry it's been displayed, let me show you that. Geometry has been displayed just exactly as the other one, but now I have barely any data attached to it. So in the case of walls and curtain walls, for instance, all I'm saving there is just two property sets. There's just a property set about the file rating, which I might not even be using, and a property set for differentiating external and internal walls. So just that additional property set is responsible for 30 or 40% of the file size when it comes to an IFC. So arguably, taking a file from here and either including or excluding that additional data is responsible for a good chunk of both the size of the file and also the time that the file will take to export as an IFC. All right. That's basically what I had prepared. But I'm happy to take any questions if you guys have them. Actually, any questions at all at this point, so that we can, from next session, we can start going with the second bit of the exchange, where we're going to start bringing in and out files. All right, don't see any questions coming through. So, oh, there you go. Let's take a look at that. So we've got a question there. The question is, how do we import IFC files correctly into Archicad? The answer is on webinar 1 and 2. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, look, that's a longer answer. So, but I'm happy to take you through the basic rules of thumb, if you like. So the first one is, generally speaking, you don't import the IFC files if you don't need to. Arguably, same thing as we used to do when we were using DWG files. It is very common that you're going to get newer files or different iterations of the same file to be used in your file. So you typically don't import them, you actually link them in. So you create a hot link into your file from IFC. So that's typically going through, typical process of place a hot link, and then the module you select, it should be an IFC file. Now, when you choose an IFC file, the next thing that you will notice is that this additional pop-up option shows up, which relates to the translator that you want to use. And by default, it goes, again, by default, not that it's completely necessary, it goes to the template that you're using in your company. The good thing is you can go ahead and change that. And what is actually recommended is, for the sake of linking in, you want to have dedicated translators in your file. What I've done in this particular case is, well, that's what we actually want to do from the next step. But imagine what you're receiving is a file from your structural engineer. Chances are you want to create your dedicated translator based on a Revit structural import or a SIA import or a Tekla structures import, which are sort of preset to get a decent translator from those different BIM applications. And then, from that point of view, you choose the file and it will be linked in. What is recommended, though, is that every one of those files that you're linking into your file will have a translator. So typically what you will see on a file is that in this list, translators for import, you will likely have your, I don't know, naming convention is something that goes different company from company, but let's say we were using the company, the job number. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 dash, and then this is the translator to get the file from a structural engineer. So we'll call it str concrete, imagining that you may have another file for steel or something. And that's going to be a good start, because then on, from that point on, every time you update the structural file coming in, you will use the same translator and you can manipulate the way that translates from then on, not needing to delete the file and bring it again, or having to open the file in Archicad, manipulate things, and then having to import or link in that file. So there's no need for that. You just need to create an import or translator for import dedicated for that particular file that is coming in. And then because it's going to be dedicated, you can do things like mapping the layers, mapping the materials, and mapping the properties if you need to. For the case of structural engineers, it's also very highly recommended to filter the model so you don't get things that you may not need for the file. Typically, that will be rebar, for instance, brackets in between steel elements. Normally, you don't need that, or imagine the bolts inside the brackets, which typically come with a high number of polygons, and you may not need that just for the sake of coordination. So the import side of it is something that we're still going to cover in the next few webinars, so stay put, because that's exactly what we're going to go through. What we did go through in the first webinars was on the export side, since we started the exchange by sharing our files with the other people. All right, so part of these, but the details of these, we're gonna discuss that later on the next hopefully 2 to 3 webinars. The next question I have there is, how does the translator affect the IFC file received by the other party? What? Yeah, highly affects the results on the receiving party. So depending on the software the other person is using, when you create an IFC file, you're creating a standard IFC file based on your translation for export. So for instance, I have different translators here, as I was mentioning before, with different levels of detail and geometry. And what this is doing is basically creating data that gets embedded into the IFC. For instance, this one with low level of detail for the attached data, as you can see here, it's not exporting any classifications or embedded properties at all. It's only exporting things that I have mapped through the translator. So that is, in this mapping here, only the things that I have mapped directly, and those you can identify because they usually have in this listing here, they will have this chain icon, meaning that is being mapped to read from Archicad from a specific data, so you don't have to type that in. So that will be dropped into the IFC. Now, it will affect the receiving software in the way that receiving software will require a translation into the file. So whether they take that name and convert that into something in their file, that depends on what they do with it, but the data will be available. It is different if you use a different translator, like in the case of using as I mentioned before, if I have a translator that includes a lot of data, you can actually go ahead and say, look, include, let me see if I have a good example in here. This one. Include all beam data. That's going to include all classifications, all properties, absolutely everything from Archicad, all IFC properties, not only the ones that I map, but actually everything. And with that, sure, it will create a larger file, but it's not necessarily a more complete or correct file in any case. So that will affect the receiving file, the receiving software, since a lot more data will be imported, and you're forcing them to filter through a lot of stuff that may not be relevant. So the recommended solution is try to export just the things that are needed. Same thing we do with drawings. If someone is asking you for floor plans, you don't send them every single detail and schedule. You rather follow the previous agreement and then give them whatever they were asking for. So yeah, the translator heavily affects the file that the other guys will receive. All right, so we're running out of time today. Please make sure you register for the next webinars, where we're going to keep the conversation. These, in the next webinars, we're going to cover is essentially this portion up here, where now we're going to start receiving files, and we want to go through the process of make sure that we have dedicated translators for those files, and then reusing the data that comes through that, both geometric data and attached data that we may need for our own purpose. All right. So with that, I need to go through the end of this because I thought we were going to cover some of that. Just a brief reminder, if you want to double check relevant websites, relevant to the kind of exchange data that we have, go double check those websites there on the screen. And for any additional help, just remember that we have the helpline and the support team that can help you with any technical queries. Please subscribe within the next webinars, but generally speaking, we're going to be running these webinars Tuesday, 11:30 to 12. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.